Welcome to the test set. Here we talk with some of the brightest thinkers and tinkerers in statistical analysis, scientific computing, and machine learning, digging into what makes them tick, plus the insights, experiments, and OMG moments that shape the field. In this episode, we interview Vincent Warmerdam, first full-time hire at Marimo, founder of calmcode.io, which has some really nice tech tutorials, and someone who seems to be a man of many talents. Vincent claims pursuing side activities rather than doubling down on tech are the killer feature of his career, and I honestly can't agree more. He started out bartending at a comedy theater, later he practiced jokes at his other job as a tour guide, finally he landed a job at the tech company Spacey by delivering a well-timed joke in a bar at a conference. And this brings us to the meat of the conversation, Marimo notebooks and data analysis. At a time when AI can generate entire notebooks in seconds, Vincent argues for the opposite approach. Generate with AI a notebook with a few cells filled out, and then just stare at a chart for a couple minutes. Ultimately, get involved and be selfish in wanting to understand the data yourself. So with that, Vincent Warmerdam. Vincent, thanks for coming on the test set. Yeah, where do we begin? I mean, I feel like you have such a broad set of things from your open source contributions to Calm Coder. Maybe you could just catch us up on, just give us a broad swath of sort of the range of things you've been up to.
Sure. I mean, one thing, it's calmcode.io. It's not Calm Coder, but no worries. There's a bit of a detail. Now, I guess because I get the question a lot, because it is true that I've done a bunch of things, but the way that I see it is I'm kind of open in the sense that I like to expose myself to things that just seem interesting, and then you end up doing stuff. And as long as you document it properly and share it with people the right way, then you'll be known for things. So one thing that just happened with, let's say, the open source thing, my most downloaded package right now, I think, is scikit-lego. It's been downloaded almost 2 million times now. But it was just me playing around with scikit-learn and sort of thinking there's a bunch of stuff missing in scikit-learn. Whenever I go to a different client, there's this one component that I always end up reusing because it didn't have pandas support back in the day. So I had a couple of components that did the pandas thing, and I had a couple of components that did the group by thing. And there were a bunch of these tricks that I had in my pocket, but I kind of felt that contributing those upstream to scikit-learn was way harder than coming up with a little package that just shared the idea. But then it turned out people started running it in production for realsies, and scikit-lego was kind of a cool name, so it stuck in people's memory. Then I did a conference talk about it. It became more popular. We got contributors, etc. That was kind of the thing that happened by accident, but I was curious. I have tons of open source projects that went nowhere, just to be clear. But this was one that just happened to stick around. And then you become known as the guy who did a good talk on scikit-lego and do more things. But just like with the keyboards, just like with the YouTube, just like with the career path, it is really just I show up, I do things, I blog about it, make sure it's logged, and people remember me. That's the trick. It's nothing planned. It just happens if you expose yourself and if you try to be a bit memorable about it.
It's so interesting. I mean, I think kind of researching your work for this is the most rabbit holes I think I've ever gone down, and just been intrigued with kind of everyone. Yeah, it's interesting to hear about scikit-lego, and I know you were also at Probable and Explosion, which are really open source kind of driven companies.
That might need an explainer too. So what happened there? I was at this consultancy that shall not be named because I'm still recovering, but I was attending via that consultancy this conference in Berlin. It was called Spacey in Real Life. I think it was 2018, maybe 2019. I kind of forget. But I went there because I thought, I want to learn more about these text embeddings. Something's happening there, and I don't understand it. Kind of feels like I should know about it more. And that's how I met Matt and Ines. The co-founders of Explosion, co-creators of Spacey. And then I was just at a bar, and the bar was packed. We were all sort of standing like this, side by side, shoulder to shoulder. And we went to a new bar, and I went up to Ines and I said, "Thank God, this bar is way more spacey." It's really, really silly joke, really, really silly joke. But they remember me because of that. And then the day after we did some presentations, and then Matt and Ines looked at me and said, "Oh, I think that guy could YouTube well." Because they were looking for a YouTuber to maybe explain Spacey, and they thought, this Dutch guy seems funny. And I told them, look, sounds cool. I've never done it before. You're gonna have to coach me a little bit, but sure. And then those videos became pretty popular, and that's kind of how I got my first job at Raza, which was this chatbot startup, from way before, where we did LLMs basically. And I turned out to be pretty good on the YouTube thing and the explainy thing, and made some packages and open source things there that kind of took off. And then at some point, Matt and Ina said, "Hey, we have funding now. Maybe could be cool to join us." So I joined them, and then did cool things there. And they ran out of funding, so then I was looking for something else to do. And then turned out that scikit-lego was one of the most popular scikit-learn plugins by then. And then the scikit-learn people who started this company called Probable said, "Hey, Visit, could you join us here maybe?" And then there, I started doing a podcast for promotional reasons. And then it turned out that there was this project called Marimo, which was pretty interesting. I interviewed the founder because we had a podcast back at Probable that I was hosting. And then it turned out that the founder was from the same town that I lived in. So I lived in California when I was 12. And he's also from Cupertino. He lived like 2 blocks away from me. So we hit it off. And then he came to the conclusion of, oh, we also kind of need a DevRel at some point when we have funding. And that's again how I kind of switched. It's just more coincidental than you might think, but it is conscious coincidental in the sense of, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm consciously going to move in that direction. But that's how this all happens.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear it all snowball, and sort of like in the beginning you described that you were like punning about Spacey, but secretly unknown to you were like actually interviewing a little bit.
I don't know if they were aware of it, but yes. But I don't know if either of the parties knew that they were interviewing, but I do. One bit of feedback that I have gotten quite a few times is it is useful if you can leave a memorable impression, because then people remember you. There's a lot of people on the planet, and a lot of people are easy to forget. But if for some weird reason you're kind of funny, then people remember you.
I was just saying to Vincent before the call that we met one time at a conference in Budapest where I was giving a talk. And I met this Dutch guy who's really into open source, and I think you were still working for a software consultancy around that time. And but you left a good impression. So then you popped up later, and I saw you went to do DevRel at Marimo, and so I was like, oh yeah, Vincent, he's a memorable guy.
Yeah, I think I gave my somewhat famous Pokemon lightning talk at that event. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, there is something to it. And like one other thing that I do think, and this is like a hindsight explainer, like you look at your life and at some point you come to a conclusion. One thing that in hindsight turned out to be like the best thing ever that I did back in college. And this is a really, really random thing. But I was a bartender at a comedy theater in Amsterdam, like one of the oldest ones, like a really, really fancy one. And all during college, during like college season, like outside of the summer holiday, I was just serving beer to like the most famous Dutch comedians, basically. And in the summer, I would be a Dutch tour guide. So like people come to Amsterdam, you're a tour guide on the bike. And I was kind of thinking like, gee, it's actually kind of perfect that I can like practice my jokes that I kind of peek from the comedians. Because then during summer, I just have a new group of tourists every day that I can practice on, basically. And that was also the way for me to make it fun to do that gig. So I ended up doing that for like 4 years, basically. And then you fast forward and like you're the guy who's like really comfortable doing conference talks, and you do kind of go like, okay, that's actually a skill you learned back from your college days when you had that job basically on the side. And it's like one of these little things. I also was like really into rowing. I did like semi-professional rowing for a good year. Like little things like that do stack up if you just have a wide variety of like skills and things you've done. And that's something I do think some people don't do. And there's a mistake in that where I'm just going to double down on tech and that's going to be the path forward. I mean, it could work, but you're probably going to be more interesting if you do more side activities. And at least for me, I've noticed that, hey, yeah, in hindsight, that is actually kind of the killer feature of my career at this point.
I think the tour groups too is interesting to hear, where you just have the like repeated chance to like, it's a lot like the format that I guess comics use, where they're like hitting open mics. You're just like taking advantage of these groups.
Well, I mean, like another aspect of the tourism thing is like Amsterdam has a pretty okay rich history, I suppose. It's also like interesting for that, like you get to hear all the stories. But the main thing you practice with that, by the way, is not so much jokes; it's storytelling. That's the key thing, because you got to tell the stories such that the tourists don't get bored effectively, because they don't get tips.
Yeah, geez, it was like a high stakes. You had something riding on it. Sweet tips.
It is nice to know that you're the guy who gets like the most tips from the entire group. Like that's a fun game to play.
When I asked how you wound up in your current role, you said you were backpacking through Latin America.
Oh, right. Yeah, the story starts a bit more. Okay. Yeah. I did say that. So let's go back even further. So you got to imagine, my degree is in econometrics and operations research, so very much applied math. but very little coding. Like they didn't really teach me any coding whatsoever. Like they gave you a Java course and like a course in Oxmetrics and like some other language no one writes in. But I had to teach myself Python and R and JavaScript and all of those things. So, but I wasn't sure if that was going to be my career because you're normally supposed to be like an actuarian or something like that, like good money and all that. But oh, well, I don't know. Like data science might become a thing. It was like around the time that was kind of new, but I had to figure out if like coding was going to be a thing that I was going to do, if that was going to be a thing that I would enjoy doing. And then I figured, I do also want to go backpacking, but if I take some work as an independent contractor with me as I go to Buenos Aires and like Latin America, up to Peru and like all those nice places, um, if I'm willing, if at some point it hits me that I feel more like programming than to go clubbing every evening, then that'll be a signal that it's such that I can say, like, okay, Vincent, now you got to commit to this career path a bit because there's something about this that is just that really just tickles you. And I just noticed, as much as going out in Buenos Aires and all those lovely places, as much as amazing as the cocktails in Lima in Peru really are, I just noticed that at some point I just felt like coding a little bit more than going out every evening. So that's where it started, like that realization. Because then you kind of know, like, okay, that I don't know where I'm going to end up, but I do at least have a experience that really confirms a direction, at least, right? So that's where, in my mind, at least, the career really started.
I love that you just stacked them against each other, like head to head. Who's gonna win?
I think it's like, or while I was backpacking, it just became very clear. I don't know if I was that conscious about it up front, but at least in hindsight, this was the story I tell myself, I guess.
Yeah, it's so interesting, the whole path into tech, and now you're at Marimo. Maybe do you mind maybe tell us a little bit about Marimo and how you got involved there and what you're doing there?
So, the way this all started, you got to imagine I was back at Probable as the company that's like a good chunk of the scikit-learn core team is there, and I was doing DevRel stuff. And like one of the things you can then do is you can say, let's look at all these adjacent technologies and let's sort of try it out and like do it in a live stream. People find that interesting. So, Marimo was this new notebook thing. I was just kind of curious. And I tried it out on a live stream. Then afterwards, I also did a podcast, got the founder on. And then I just played this game of like, okay, do I find myself going back to Jupyter or do I find myself going to Marimo? Because it's kind of up in the air. It's a new technology. It's kind of scary to invest in it, right? And then I just kind of noticed that Marimo started to correct me. Because a thing that Marimo does that Jupyter doesn't is Marimo basically says you can only define a variable once. There can be one cell where you define the variable, and there's none of that stuff in Jupyter where you can say a is equal to 1 in one cell and then a is equal to 2 in another cell. And depending on the order in which you run the cells, the state and memory changes. Marimo doesn't allow for any of that. So in Marimo, it's all very much reactive. You can define a variable somewhere, you can refer to it from other cells, but the moment you define a variable twice, oh, we're going to throw errors in your face because probably something is going wrong. And I just noticed during a live stream, something totally went wrong in Jupyter that Marimo would have instantly fixed if I would just have used Marimo. And that was the point in time where I kind of feel like, okay, it's got that one feature where it's automatically correcting me. Oh, and it also has, because it's reactive, like you change a variable in one cell, all the other cells that depend on that variable automatically update. That is amazing if you want to do stuff with like widgets and really get the browser into Python. That's also like a thing you can really do. Like, oh, but hang on. I am rethinking the way I want to work now. There's something here. I should chase this. That's the order of things, basically. And I can give a more sort of formal definition of what Marimo actually does, but that was the experience that got me towards the company.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting here that it's like Marimo introduces like a constraint, like it doesn't want you to redefine a variable, but I love when it's like something constrains your behavior and it just ends up really kind of like reshaping, providing like a lot of nice options as a result, basically.
It's kind of like abstraction in general. That's the thing I just really dig. Like at some point, you just understand linear algebra or calculus or something like that, and then you don't think about numbers anymore. You think about integrals, and it's a different thing, and you can approach a topic differently.
Yeah, I mean, after the Jupyter Notebook got really popular, I feel like there were a lot of people that were thinking about notebooks in terms of like everyone's familiar with spreadsheets and like the reactive model of spreadsheets, and so like trying to introduce those ideas into the notebook medium in a way that made sense. And I think like certainly in open source, like Marimo was the first, like, there's some closed source, closed source notebooks that implement similar things, but you gotta pay for a product. But to have like that thing available in open source is really exciting. And like what I always tell people about Marimo is that it's the fastest growing Python project, I think, outside of UV. Like maybe there's some maybe there's some AI projects that have become faster growing in the meantime. But if you look at like the rapid star growth, like Marimo is just I think it reached like a hockey stick growth pattern where I think UV's got like 80,000 stars, but I don't know how many Marimo has right now, but it's like it was pretty breathtaking rapid growth for a new project.
Yeah, I think we're around 20K or something. But if we just look at downloads, like that's the number that I typically look at.
Yeah, that's like a more
we,
real metric.
we grow about 5% a week.
That's pretty intense compounding.
Yeah, it does get intense. Yes,
I wish my bank account grew at 5% a week.
that would be both amazing and scary. But but like I'm also on the growth side of things. I do a little bit of engineering now and again, but like not in the engineering team, definitely more on the growth team. But yeah, it's like it's not every day you're in a project that grows that fast. That is definitely yeah. Like, I mean, scikit-learn also had that phase at some point where it just sort of grew exponentially, but now they're a bit more stable now. But to sort of be in there when the growth is actually happening is definitely a fun roller coaster.
I mean, I think what's interesting is that Marimo appeared and kind of co-developed with modern AI and LLMs, and so I'm interested to like hear a little more from you on like your perspective on like the role of AI and LLMs in notebooks, and certainly like I think it's clearly taken an interest from the AI world. Like Marimo got acquired by CoreWeave, which is like a AI infrastructure company, and so congratulations to the team on that. But so it's clear that like there's something going on with like the AI world, and so but I haven't really thought too much about the user interface layer and how that interacts with like how people build AI models and do AI in 2026.
So one thing, I think the earliest AI feature that we had, and I could be wrong because these were features that were kind of already there when I joined. But we had GitHub autocomplete because that used to be free. There used to be an API for it, so that was a thing that was sort of added in the front end quite early. We also had, I think, right around the time when I joined, this thing in the sidebar where you could bring your own LLM API key. And then we could do this thing where we contextualize everything that's in the notebook right now, have that be part of the prompt. And then we have this thing on the side with a copy button that lets you copy code into cells. And like we had those features quite early. But then a few like kind of lucky breaks just kind of happened. One thing that happened was that Dylan, one of the engineers in our team, he just recognized that, hey, maybe it's not just the LLM so much when Claude Code happens. Maybe it's the harness that matters most. So we ended up making a linter just for Marimo. And it was really not meant for humans, it was meant for the LLM. So the thing that we mentioned earlier, in Marimo, you have a cell. You cannot have the same variable be declared in two cells. That is one of the things that this linter will pick up, and it will do so in a way such that the text that comes out makes it very clear for the LLM how to fix it. So like that's like a thing that makes Marimo so much more useful when you're dealing with LLMs because it makes it very easy for the LLM to just correct it. The other lucky break that we also kind of got is there's this pretty popular IDE called Zed. I don't know if you've heard about it, but they invested a lot in this ACP. I think I can call it a protocol, but it's basically this way such that if you're an agent like Claude Code or whatnot, that you basically have a kind of a protocol that other apps can plug into. So Zed kind of started with that.
Just to round it out, ACP is Agent Client Protocol for anyone.
Yes. So if you're, let's say, a text editor, you don't have to do any nasty terminal, read the text that comes out, buffer it back in. It's like an actual protocol that Claude can understand, and you can interface with it. And that's something we could basically just piggyback off of. And that thing works very well. So one thing that you can do with an ACP like that, and that's a trick that we like to use in Marimo, is let's say that you have a Polars pipeline or a Pandas pipeline, but something where you start with a data frame and then you do like a step, like we have logs from a server, we add sessions, and then we filter out the bots. And the thing that comes out of that, we want to write some more Polars or SQL for. It would be amazing if the LLM could just get the schema from that data frame instead of having to try to figure out what the columns are after 6 of these pipeline steps, so to say. So what you can do in Marimo is you can tell the LLM and then pass in a variable, and then we can add context for that variable that's in memory right now. And we can have different context if it's an integer, and we can have different context if it's a data frame or a SQL table. And that also helps the LLM immensely when it comes to like writing proper pipelines. So there's all these sort of lucky breaks that we were able to just discover quite early. But also, like, to be quite honest, if I were Jupyter right now, like Jupyter is so used everywhere that they're also in a spot where they just can't make sudden changes to the projects. Like that would be kind of dangerous, especially if you consider Jupyter doesn't just do Python, by the way. It's also wants to do R and Julia and lots of other languages. It's pretty much language agnostic. And on the Marimo side, it's a whole bunch easier because we just say, no, we only do Python, right? So there's reasons why we're also able to iterate quickly. But yeah, we just had a couple of like ecosystem lucky breaks, things that were just working out very well for us. Also, like UV, for example. UV added that PEP 576. I forget the number, but the one where you can add the dependencies on top of the Python file.
Like for like UV run, yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's a miracle drug.
It's a miracle drug. But here's the thing: Marimo notebooks are Python files, so it works for us immediately for free. That's amazing. So we can package our notebooks dependency free, basically, without a requirements.txt file. And that we can do that because we made the choice to have just be a Python file. And for Jupyter, it's a different story because reasons. But yeah, a lot of it, we got a couple of good lucky breaks where we're able to just integrate really quickly. But also, we are a pretty small team. Engineers are super solid. I think we make one release a week now, but it wasn't that long ago when we made 3. We're trying to be a bit more stable, but
I definitely tinkered a bit with the agent client protocol stuff in Marimo, and I'm super excited. It seems like it's early days and it's just rolling out, but I'm super excited to see it like integrated, and I feel like it's going to be a real game
we support
changer.
open code now as well. So open code has that's this other CLI that they support all the open source models as well. So that was something we could also just plug in quite easily. I will say, like, one thing that took me a little bit by surprise, but it's something we're heavily investing in now, is just skills in general. So the idea there is that even if you don't want to use any of the AI stuff inside of Marimo, what can we do to make Claude Code or any of these command line tools as good as possible to just generate Marimo notebooks on the fly? And we're almost at the point where we can vibe code an any widget just for one analysis. Like, we're not quite there, but I do have a couple of these examples where they just worked immediately like that.
I mean, I've seen a ton of people, like many people who aren't familiar with, who've never used Marimo before. Like the dashboard mode is like people are building like little apps, and it's because already people were using Jupyter notebooks and like Jupyter widgets to build little dashboard like things, but to actually have like you develop the app and then you can look at it in dashboard mode, and you don't see the code, you just see like the widgets basically. So it's pretty cool. I speaking of ACP, I just merged, just shipped, I guess, ACP support in my code review system, RoboRev. So like clearly it's gotten interest in the broader open source community. So like people are, whenever they encounter a new project, they're like, oh, can this project do ACP? And so it's definitely very interesting.
So on the topic of like widgets and stuff that you could do in Marimo, I do want to have like one plug for my colleague Trevor. There's this standard called AnyWidget. I don't know if you've heard about it or seen it. It's getting more ubiquitous is sort of the thing I'm trying to do. But there is now a standard such that if you build a widget according to this one spec, it'll work in Jupyter, it'll work in Colab, VS Code, or Marimo, like all the places basically. And the way like people are sitting on this thing and like sleeping on it, people should definitely invest way more in it. There's this library that I've built where I just make all these widgets for my analyses and I share them with people. People should really do more of it. But the thing that I really love about those widgets in particular is that you can kind of start imagining that we now can create these magic Lego bricks, if it were, such that you can actually attach browser functionality to Python, which is something that used to be super hard. I can now honestly make notebooks that let me use the gamepad to run some Python scripts. And for annotation reasons, for evals and stuff, there's good reasons why that makes a lot of sense. But also webcams and also all sorts of other APIs that the browser has. You can just attach that to Python now, and you've got access to JavaScript and all the good things. So one thing that I do try to remind people of is it's not so much, yeah, we've got Marimo and that's great, but it's like the entire ecosystem is way more modern than it was 10 years ago. And that means that you should take a step back and just reflect on, hey, what's new? Because you can rethink things definitely at this point. It's not just LLMs; it's also the entire ecosystem has been made more modern, effectively.
Yeah, it's a good point too. If people are sleeping on any widget, maybe maybe worth noting too that people like Plotly are using it, and as I understand, like the adoption's pretty high across the ecosystem.
Altair also uses it now, I think. I've made this thing called draw data where you get a 2D canvas and you can just draw a data set that you can then use, like draw and you get something into polars or pandas. Um, so the sky really is the limit here. Like the most extreme thing that I've ever made. Um, this is a really, really nerdy thing, but for the longest time in my life, I always kind of understood differential equations, but nothing really clicked. And then I saw this one YouTube video about this differential equation called Lanchester's law, which is about when two like Age of Empires armies just smash into each other. Apparently, there's a differential equation such as you can predict how many blue army is slightly bigger than red army. Can we calculate how many blue army soldiers survive? Is kind of the differential equation. And I thought, it's so cool. I wonder if I could vibe code in any widget that just simulates all those battles with JavaScript because you can do sort of collision detection and stuff. And you totally can. So I built this collision detection battle simulator in JavaScript with Claude, and that generates data for the Python notebook to like check if the differential equation actually holds, and it does. And again, like part of it is the LLM, yeah, sure, but like part of it is definitely the widget. And you just couldn't imagine this 2 years ago, right?
Yeah. I almost wonder too if it's worth I don't know if this is zooming out or in, but like almost just talking about the widget a little bit, because I think the term widget's so interesting, and it like I think a lot of people have some familiarity with working with widgets, but I wonder if it's almost worth talking a bit about like what is a widget to you, and what does it do so well like for your workflow?
So I kind of imagined this question might pop up, so and I think I've got like the perfect analogy. So I've got a kid now, right? And I want to have a creative toy for my kid. So I could do two things. One thing I could do is I could buy a 3D printer, and then you can 3D print all sorts of interesting things. Or I could buy the kid Legos. One of the crucial differences between the two is that if it turns out that the toy that I 3D print isn't exactly what my kid likes, the only thing to do is to start from scratch and 3D print a new thing from the top, like whole again, basically. And if I didn't think about Legos, like the kind of the magic thing is that you can always just click it in and click it out. It's something that's really reusable in a lot of different ways. And if you have a very useful widget, then there's more than one way to use it. So, okay, what kind of widgets will be widgets then? Well, it'll be kind of like a map, like a Google Maps kind of a thing inside of a Python notebook. You can kind of do GeoJSON stuff maybe, or a drawing data thing. You can have lots of educational use cases for it. But the nice thing about a widget is that it's reusable in different ways and that it can click with Python and all the Python data ecosystem tools. That's kind of the way that I think about it. And if I think about vibe coding in particular, vibe coding to me is a lot more like the 3D printer, where you're going to 3D print the thing kind of from scratch for like one specific purpose. But once you've got something done, it's not necessarily the case that you can retrofit it to immediately attach into a Python notebook as well. Like that's not the way that you would think about it. So widgets are like Legos. That's really the way that I like to think about it.
And I guess just to kind of finish out the last piece too is like, when do you see someone wanting to be in a notebook? Like you can have a widget in a notebook. When do you kind of put yourself in the notebook with widgets versus kind of run? Like people could vibe code a React app. Do you have a sense for when they'd kind of want to be in a notebook with a widget?
To me, it's when the human's involved a little bit more. So like if you have people have to use the app and like the innards don't really matter, the React app thing sounds a bit more plausible. But when dealing with data, I mean, usually the whole problem with data science is that you want to understand the story that's in the data set. And if you understand it, then you can make better decisions. That's kind of the plan that we have. But in order for you to understand the data, the human has to be involved somehow. Like you have to be able to read a chart or like inspect or whatnot. So the whole point of these widgets is to make that part easier. Again, it's a Lego brick that you can kind of click in, such that hopefully something becomes more interactive and analysis or whatnot, so the human can actually kind of play around, swap things out. That's the game plan here. And like I wouldn't do a data analysis with a React app. I think I would still prefer to do that in a notebook because it's more like a scratch pad. You don't know, like you have to be very flexible. That's why we like notebooks.
One of the big questions on my mind these days, and I'm obviously interested in what you think about it, is that in a world where people essentially stop writing code and they're just prompting, like what do you think? Just looking at the current stack of tools like the widgets and the notebook, And I mean, I think it's good that Marimo was built in this era already. So like, I assume that you've all been thinking hard about this. But like, what do you think the average user workflow looks like in 2 years or 3 years, where like essentially nobody's writing any Python code anymore, but we still need to create these business artifacts that can be published, whether it's like an interactive dashboard that's a bunch of Python code and analysis, as well as some widgets that get published and displayed, and maybe the artifact is a Marimo notebook. I don't know, but it's interesting that a lot of these tools were built for users who are spending their day like looking at code, thinking about code, writing code every day, and then we're essentially speeding toward a world where like maybe people glance at the code, but they're not really looking very hard. If anything, they're going to be asking like agents to like check the code for them rather than looking at it themselves, which is increasing what I'm doing. Like I'm not writing code, but I'm asking agents to read the code for me and make sure it and look for bugs and things like that.
Yeah, so like part of it is the psychology of it. I feel like a little bit, right? Like, oh, we don't know. It feels kind of scary, and the whole thing with Claude, at least to me, is sometimes there's a wave of like, oh my god, it can do so much, but then there's a phase where I see it fail horribly, then I kind of feel grounded again. So there's that psychology of it is happening in the background. As with that's happening in the back of my mind. I just want to be honest about it. I don't exactly know what's going to happen, but if I think about my days in consulting, like, what's the thing that really went wrong most of the time? That's people just didn't know what was in the data, and they were making all sorts of weird, like bad decisions because of it. And I don't know if the LLM is going to do everything, if there's going to be more or less bad decisions. But something in my mind is basically saying, like, the magic of the notebook is it's also a nice way to debug. There is something about let's make a chart that should be a summary, and then just staring at the chart for 5 minutes can immediately give you this, oh, hang on, that should not happen. Why is that line going down in December? It should be going up. So, like, it's a debugging thing. And in that sense, you could argue, well, the code is not necessarily the most important thing. The most important thing is the understanding. Like the notebook and the code are a tool in order to get to the data understanding bit, so to say, right? So I don't know to what extent you need to properly understand all of the code, but you do need to be able to sort of look at a chart and say, that's bad. We have to dive in deeper. Like that I think is a skill that I don't see go away anytime soon. The best example I have of this is in R. My favorite data set, the chick weight data set, is just Michael. Is that a data set that's kind of well known?
This is like, yeah, it's like it has 2 columns. It's built into R. Is that?
No. So but so one column is the diet. The other column is the time. The other column is the chicken, and the other column is the weight of the chicken.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So over time, you see all these chickens gaining weight. That's the whole idea. And you can train machine learning models on it. You can predict, given this diet, given this time, how fat is the chicken or how not fat is the chicken. You can make all sorts of models there. You could do something very fancy with PyMC to do something Bayesian. It works magic on that data set. But there's one thing wrong if you're going to do modeling that way. And that is the fact that some chickens actually die prematurely. And the only way that the model can be made aware of that is if you, the human, are aware of that. Because if you're going to calculate some sort of regression average on timestamp 10, how is the model going to be aware of the fact that some chickens died at timestamp 5 for that specific diet? Well, we could have an LLM automate this, but this is like my main example of things will go wrong if you don't understand what's in the data set. And variants of this story happen all over the place. So for me, the notebook is basically this environment where I can do my best to prevent stuff like that from going wrong. And it's one of Hadley's quotes that I remember. Like, the cool thing about visualization is it doesn't scale, but it can still surprise you. It's that surprising nature. It's basically this debugging tool, but for numeric stuff. That's the way that I experience it. And even if the code is going to be maybe less valuable, the debugging numeric aspect of it definitely won't become less important. So one thing I do a lot now is I try to just reproduce academic articles with vibe coding. Like, here's an article, here's an LLM. I want to understand this article as quickly as possible. And then the notebook, again, becomes this artifact where I can look at charts and I can try to understand if I understand the technique of the paper, so to say, right? Like that's, in my mind, the essence of what the notebook is all about. It's not so much about the code per se. It's more this artifact that helps me think. Or reason, I guess, is the better word.
And if I'm understanding your paper example, it's like you're kind of trying to reproduce like a place where you can kind of like tinker and double check and like tweak.
I want to check if I understand the paper, and can I reproduce the experiment from scratch, and then and sort of fiddle around and see where the limits are of the claim of the paper, like that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't know, Wes, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm definitely pretty pretty AI pilled these days. Like I feel definitely this sense, especially for the data science ecosystem. I feel like data science is one of the domains where the most judgment and nuance is present. Like it isn't like building a to-do list app. Like doing data science is not the same as building a CRUD app. And so like the choice of models and like the decisions involved, like there is a certain like art and taste involved with like choosing techniques and building a scientific process that tries to eliminate your predispositions or biases about like what you think the analysis should what results the analysis should have. And what I've been hearing from people who are doing like vibe coded science is that essentially the models are kind of tuning in to what you're trying to prove or what you're trying to demonstrate, and then they're subtly like building data science that essentially tries to prove or like fit itself to the assertion that you're trying to make, which is essentially like amplifying your personal bias. I feel like this is exactly what we don't want. Um, like we don't want the LLMs like essentially doing like sycophantic science. Like, oh, like what are you trying to prove here? Like, let me come up with an analysis that confirms your, it's like a more intense version of confirmation bias, which is a classic problem in statistics and science in general. So I don't know, like it's in yeah, in this new world where people don't want to write code anymore. Like I haven't written code in months, and yet I'm building tons of software, but I'm doing software engineering, which is a different sort of thing. Like I don't trust LLMs to add numbers, but I trust them to write Go code or write Python code to write functions that add numbers. And so it's a tricky thing.
You could argue though that I'm assuming in your case you do. I mean, you've written pandas and a bunch of things, so you can tell yourself like, okay, I've got taste, right? Like, I need this to happen in a certain way, otherwise it's BS. Like, you can make claims like that quite comfortably, I think, right? As far as unit testing goes, there's like guardrails you can come up with, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, but if people are mainly interacting with data science through like they aren't actually looking very closely at the code, they're just looking at the charts and the tables that are being outputted. It's like, and so the question is, can you effectively do data science by looking at the results? So it's like you do need to scrutinize the methodology, and so maybe you can have agents in explore and essentially create a visual explanation of what the methodology is, like how like what is the model architecture, like what is the data pre-processing pipeline, what types of data transformations are being done, like how are outliers in the data, like data trimming and normalization, like how is that being done. And so perhaps like the solution will be to create a set of rules and best practices to essentially a type of spec for data science. Because I think right now like specs are all the rage for building software with LLMs. Like you work with agents to develop a spec, and then you do development, and periodically you do spec conformance checks. Like you ask adversarial agents, not the one writing the code, but like, hey, another agent wrote this code. Here's the spec for what the software is supposed to do. Could you evaluate the work that's been done against the spec and let me know if it's what I asked for, if what we intended. And so maybe with data science, like developing a set of prompts and processes where you're enabling LLM assisted data science, but you have like essentially a series of checks and balances basically to try to mitigate the effects of confirmation bias, and the model kind of sycophantically trying to change the methodology such that it produces your desired outcome, because it's trying just to make you happy. Basically, it's like prove the thing that the user asked for.
I mean, in my mind, there's a couple of very human habits that I tend to rely on, but I don't. It might also depend on the kind of work that I do and the kind of notebooks that I write. But at least the thing that I taught myself chick weight example again, right? If I've learned anything from the chick weight data set, is that if I make a chart, I need to stop for 5 minutes and look at the damn thing. Because otherwise, you're not going to notice the line that stops in the middle where a chicken might have died. Like that's kind of the lesson. And that also means that if you're vibe coding, okay, one chart at a time, I need to stare at the chart for a couple of minutes before I move on. I'm not gonna, if I do serious work, generate entire notebooks from scratch, because then you're not going to be part of the story of what's happening there. And I don't know, like some of this does feel a little bit more like an human psychological attitude thing than necessarily a LLMs can correct each other. Because again, it's all about me trying to understand the story in the data set. And if I remove myself from that equation, I'm going to be in a world of hurt. I need to be involved somehow. And maybe the solution then, at least the most plausible one to me, is let's only generate 3 cells at a time and not any faster. And when you reach a milestone, make sure you understand everything that's been happening, and then you move on. And then one really cute feature in Marimo is you can have a columnar layout. So you can have, this is column 1, this is column 2. So you can have column 1, and then when we have a conclusion, move on to column 2 and organize your thoughts that way. But to me, that's more the way to go about it, at least in this phase. Like maybe the future is going to be different, but um, like for CRUD apps, again, it's a bit different because you know that you need a model view and a controller and some CSS and stuff, so that you can kind of go, okay, boilerplate, let's go, generate the whole thing. But for a notebook, I think the approach of just taking in a few cells at a time just might be the best remedy.
I think that resonates so hard. And I think just to like recap some of the things you said, I think it's really relevant that you started with like Marimo brings a constraint to users that you can't redefine a variable. And that constraint opens up a lot of really nice behaviors. In a way, it's like psychological. I mean, it is a programming constraint, but it is getting people to think in a different way, and it unlocks a lot of stuff. I think to your point about this like psychological question, you know, what am I doing in the loop, and how am I approaching the problem? Like I really feel that like when I'm like vibe coding, when I'm heavily generating stuff, I do think there's like this softening in my brain where I really am not attentive to a lot of things. And I could see the notebook, at least as like a theory, like being in a notebook 3 cells at a time as a type of constraint on yourself to try to like put your attention on the right things feels really like a really interesting approach, and one I'm pretty curious about as I like use more AI and notice like where I put attention and where I don't.
I mean, I've reached a point with my agentic engineering essentially where I'm not reading any of the code, and so my reaction to that was, well, if I don't read the code, then I should have agents read the code for me and analyze the code. And so I built a system called RoboRev to be my like agentic pair programmer to make sure that like all the code that's being generated out of the LLMs is being reviewed by an agent that didn't generate it, and maybe even multiple perspectives. And so sometimes I'll have both Gemini and Codex review code that Claude generated, and they'll find different bugs, and that's been definitely helping. But I feel like at a certain point, we probably need like essentially the equivalent of that type of like it's not a code review per se, but it's more of like a methodological review of whether the data science being done makes sense. Like, does the data visualization make sense? Is the modeling approach does the modeling approach make sense? To essentially like, how can we avoid confirmation bias, and like, you know, the code generating agent like sycophantically trying to generate an analysis that is in tune with like what the data scientist is trying to demonstrate with their analysis.
And if we can recap Vincent's take, I almost think there are 2 very different takes on this. That Wes is very AI focused. AI writes the code, AI reviews. Vincent, you mentioned like for some situations exploring data, a sort of like notebook, human in the loop
I
approach.
could definitely be on board with the whole like let's have the LLMs write the code if that speeds things up. I think that could be like a perfectly defendable attitude. It's just that I'm kind of selfish. I want to understand the data set myself, and if I'm being removed from that equation, then then I'm failing. Like even with LLMs, I still want to be able to learn. Is kind of the attitude. And if it means that I don't have to do syntax, I think that can still be fine. But then I want to understand like how do you do? I don't know. I'm doing reinforcement learning stuff with LLMs now. Like what are good techniques to get your own LLM that does like a very specific thing is better at structured output for like very small LLMs, let's say. Like, okay, what are techniques that you could apply in order to get there? Well, I don't want the, I mean, the LM could maybe read a paper and implement something, but then I want to understand the failure scenarios. And if, I do want to learn. And I don't know how useful an LLM is unless I'm able to learn along with it at this point. That's kind of my attitude more.
Yeah, I think it's we've been seeing like a bunch of articles or blog posts come out about like cognitive debt. Like if the LLM does everything for you, like then you don't have any mental model of the code base of the problem. And like I think for some problems that's fine, but for other problems you're like, oh, now I've got to this point where like it's catastrophically failed, and I've got like I have never looked at this code base before. And now I've got to like build my way out from zero to that.
To some extent, right? To what extent this is really a new thing? Because I remember back in the day, what a lot of these data science people would do is they would just hit Shift Enter in a Jupyter notebook, run the whole thing. They would call fit predict a few times. Then they would say, look, number go up, right? So to some extent, it's also not like a really, really new thing that there's cognitive, like, that some people are quote unquote a little bit lazy in sort of taking a step back and sort of saying like, oh, it's great, everything's automated. I like to think though that one of the reasons why my career has progressed is because at some point I took the effort to go just a little bit deeper, such that I kind of knew more what was happening and could apply more tricks in practice. And sure, some of that was syntax, but some of that was also just, okay, what am I actually doing? Am I solving the right problem? And like that kind of a mental exercise. And again, like even if there's LLMs around, that mental exercise is still part of me. Like, I think there still needs to be someone that understands the data set.
One thing you said earlier, and I think you mentioned like one soft skill underrated in data science is staring at a chart for 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes, no less. Yes, 5 minutes.
Yeah, maybe that's a skill that as AI rolls out will be really hard to cultivate, like really important, especially important to cultivate.
Have you seen Bluff Bench, Vincent? That's something that Sarah and Simon put together, where like it turns out that if you ask an LLM to like read a plot, it often just like reads the axis labels effectively and then tells you a story about what it believes based on the correlation of those two variables. So I think there's also like a lot of like this visual intelligence that LLMs have yet to
Have you heard of the Gorilla data set? Oh, it's the best. This is the best. Okay. So I think it was in Italy. There's a statistics class. They split up the group in half, and like good students, they're equally represented in both halves. One group gets a data set and says, here's a couple of hypotheses we want you to check. The data set has body mass index, number of steps, and I believe male or female. And they want to say things like, okay, do men have more steps? And like a couple of hypotheses you got to check. The other group basically just got the data set and they kind of went, do something with it. What's the story in this data set? If you were to plot the actual data set, body mass index on the x-axis and steps on the other axis, you would get like blue and red colors for male and female, and it'd be a picture of a gorilla waving back at you. Now, one of these two groups was more likely to discover this than the other one. Can you guess which one? It was the one that was preoccupied with the hypothesis checks that didn't bother making the plot. So I thought, as a cute exercise, it was like a year and a half ago, like get this ChatGPT analysis bot thing. So I figured, hey, let's give the data set to this bot, see what it makes of it. It completely failed. I made a YouTube video of it. It was just super interesting. They're really bad at charts. But again, the thing with I think humans are also pretty bad at charts if they don't take 5 minutes. If you just glance at it and call it a day, there's a lot of stuff you can glance. That's cool. But it's usually like, hey, why does a line go down there? That should never happen. And things like that.
Wow.
I can't even get people to read blog posts these days, every time I send people like, hey, I enjoyed this blog post, read this blog post. They're like, read.
I mean, I gotta say, like, you've been writing a bunch of it. I've been reading your stuff recently more, I gotta say, Wes. So like you're definitely doing the good work. But I've also noticed like there's like these explainer blog posts that just get crickets these days, because why read a blog post when you can ask an LLM just in time? There's a little bit of that happening. But I gotta take the moment, and I'm sorry for the listeners. You gotta imagine Hadley came in late, so like now that he's in here, I get to ask the question to him again. Hadley, do you know the chick weight data set in R? Okay. Then I'm going to check if you actually understand what's wrong with it. Because it was my favorite data set that I use whenever I did an R course or a Pandas course even. Can you tell me what is wrong with the chick weight data set? Have you used it in a class or in a training or anything?
That brings back vague memories. It's like something is switched, like the experimental condition was switched, or some of the chick labeling.
No,
or
so some of the
something.
chickens died
No.
prematurely. That's the story of
Okay.
that one. And
Okay.
and that's in a specific diet that they die prematurely. So if you're going to predict the weight at time step like 20, chickens would have died at that time step, but the model has no way of knowing unless you as a human were to model that way. And that's kind of my main go-to as far as you have to understand the data set, otherwise stuff will go wrong in production even when number go up.
I didn't know about the data set, at least. I'm assuming Michael and Wes did not. So
I tried to guess what it was and I failed miserably. So I feel like
one thing I do think is super interesting is just if you have an interesting question and you need an answer to it. I think back in the day, if I had 2 afternoons with a person and you knew a bit of Excel, I could teach you a bit of R. And you would be very productive. That was like one of the really cool things about the tidyverse stack and all that stuff. For Python, it was not necessarily 2 days. I needed a bit longer, but you can definitely get it down to like 1 day with an LLM now. And something about that is like super duper exciting. But I am hoping that people who are going to go walk that path, that they are going to use some sort of a harness or guardrail, make lots of plots and do that kind of behavior to make sure they don't do it wrong.
Yeah. I'm so curious if y'all have advice for, I actually just talked to a person who's planning like curriculum for high school students who are learning, they were going to learn like Python and to deploy web apps and things like that. And I think originally they were going to do a lot of like teaching, like building up what they need to know. And now they're trying to figure out like, to what degree should we pull AI in really early and get you say like deploying something first? How, like they're asking like, how should we sequence the instruction? Do you have thoughts on that?
Like I think like a year ago, I basically gave myself permission, like, okay, let's see if you can actually vibe code 2 apps from scratch. You're not going to look at the code whatsoever, see what happens. And then eventually I did start looking at the code, but 2 things happened. First thing that happened was I was using Flask, and there was no CSRF protection anywhere. It does kind of feel like you should at least manually do the exercise of what could go wrong if you don't add that. Like there's something about there's something about like book smarts, you read from a book, and there's something about street smarts like, oh, I've actually pwned someone's server because there was no CSRF protection on the thing, right? And I don't know, like I do think like that sniff test, something about that. It's kind of like doing a physics experiment. Something with the Bunsen burner and the professor making something explode is making it stick way more in your mind. Again, something about the story. And just reading it from like a text that goes by so fast, like an LM can barf paragraphs, right? I fear that you're just it's not going to be in your noggin as much. So one thing I think could be cool is that you could say like, okay, kids, we're all going to build a web app now. We're going to totally vibe code it. Then we're going to see if we can break it. And that might be the classroom activity, but you're also confronted with like the unhappy path, maybe something like that. The other thing that went wrong, by the way, with the LM doing the vibe coding thingy, is I told it to make a make file and to like test stuff, and there was like a production database. But every time that I would do unit testing, it would flush the production database because it forgot to set this one environment variable to only use the local SQLite thing as opposed to the thing in production. So my flashcards kept getting removed. Again, and I do think if you hit your head and that's part of the curriculum, that could definitely be useful, right? But I don't know if you reading about an environment variable and having and going through the pain and knowing how things can go wrong. Also, if that's how do you get people to be good at correcting the LLM if you've never done a correction on yourself before? Like that's the tricky bit, I think. Because that's the skill we're going to care about. Like writing the code is becoming less valuable, but being able to check the code or being able to improve a code base by glancing at that's a more impressive skill these days. But how do you train that without the aforementioned part?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now we're seeing this rapid adoption of coding agents, and everyone's using Claude Code and Gemini and all open code and all the things. But it's also, I've noticed that a lot of people are essentially putting their minds to sleep a little bit, and that they feel like the agent knows what it's doing and is looking out for doing things the right way, and yet the more you use these things, that you observe over and over that they have egregious blind spots, and they forget to do things. They will blow away a production database by accident. And so I feel like probably at some point in the future, maybe there'll be some evolved version of coding agents where there's an agentic supervisor in the loop that's like applying software engineering best practices and security guidelines and all those things. But like, I think right now it's a little bit of a do-it-yourself affair. Like, either you create a process where you essentially apply like this supervision, where either you're the supervisor, which is more or less like the best case scenario is that you're the supervisor and you actually know what questions to ask, like how to correct the LLM and tell it like, oh, you forgot to, you're putting the production database in the same place as the application deployment. Like, you're going to destroy that with your next rsync. Like, don't do that. I actually had that happen to me, by the way. Unfortunately, it was data that didn't really matter, where I was like, did you just destroy my production database with that rsync? Like, yeah, you did. You didn't think twice about doing it either. Did you just RMRF like that directory? Like, that had important stuff in it. And so like there's a lack of guardrails right now, and supervision, and so that's, I think, probably why we're seeing like disproportionate benefit to coding agents to really experienced people, because they're able to leverage their pre-existing skills and bring their judgment and like ability to like recognize when the agents are going off the rails. And if you don't have that experience or the ability to recognize like, oh no, press escape, like you're doing the wrong thing, like you've gone off the rails, then for a lot of people, they're just going to be in a world of pain.
So I think for this is reminding me, like, for a web app, you could maybe come up with like a really constrained web framework where there's only one way to sort of deploy this thing, and that's the foolproof LLM proof. And because it's a CRUD app, you can kind of really constrain it. For data science, though, the whole point is that you are able to be creative. I think, like mixing, matching tools in ways that wasn't sort of like weird. I'm gonna just weirdest trick that works, right? In data science, weirdest trick. Back when I was at Probable, I was able to I figured out a way to get logistic regression to beat XGBoost. The way that I did that is, you got to imagine there's a data set with cars. So year that it was built, color, brand, that kind of a data set, and then price. I want to predict the price. Secondhand car. So, okay, what you could do is you could sort of say, let's do one hot encoding. So like car brands, like one, lots of zeros, and like colors, like lots of zeros and a one somewhere, one hot encoded. And then what you can do is you could sort of try and do a distance between two different encodings of these cars. But the problem is, how are you going to compare two colors? That distance is always going to be one, basically, because it's a different color. But okay, how are you going to do a similarity lookup? Okay, what you could do is you could have like a regression model. So you're going to take your encoding, and then you're going to train towards the price variable. Oh, and that means that you have a coefficient for every single variable, which includes like the one that was for a specific car brand, let's say. Oh, actually, that can be an embedding technique now. You can take your linear model, and then we can use those coefficients, multiply that by the original array. Oh, and if you then want to do a k nearest neighbor kind of a thing, then you now have a system that gets like a distribution of prices based on similar cars as well. And similarity now is not just how similar are the properties, but also how does that relate to the price. And turn out, if you build a system that way, that you actually got better predictions than XGBoost, and you also got like an uncertainty bound around that as well. Okay, I like this freedom. Like, this is something that no textbook will tell you, but if you start thinking about the problem a bit more and more, then you can come up with these super duper creative solutions. And that's also kind of feedback I do want to give to people, because people have always been asking me, like, Vincent, what book do you read to come up with these techniques? And I think the whole point is that I don't. Like, I just take a step back, I take pen and paper, I have a coffee, and I think about the problem far away from social media and distractions. And I give myself permission to let my mind free. And it's a little bit easier now that I've got a kid, actually, because he really gets me away from the laptop. He really wants to go to the playground. But that's how you do it. And again, but the problem, though, is like, if you want to then have LLMs help you, and LLMs are super powerful, it is very tempting to be intellectually lazy. And that's when you should kind of resist. And maybe like, this was a tweet from Andrej Karpathy, like, I think a couple of years ago. Maybe if learning feels a bit painful, maybe that's a good thing, because it means that you're doing something that's uncomfortable and you're doing something that's a little bit unknown. And if you look back at your week and you kind of go like, this entire week was easy peasy. Maybe you should start getting worried. Like that's maybe a way to think about it. Because then maybe you should invest in a new hobby and learn a new skill maybe that way. Maybe I'm doing calculus again just for the fun of it, also for the puzzling.
Part of the point of learning is like mental, it's like mental exercise, like how like I did pure math as an undergrad, and so I spent a lot of time like doing analysis and topology and abstract algebra and things like that. And I think like certainly like I don't apply any of those skills now. Like was it useful to learn Galois theory? Like I did, but I've forgotten all of it. But I do think that that like mental stretching and like racking your brain really hard to think about difficult theoretical problems and being able to reason about like these abstract structures in your mind, like it does it again, like I don't have I don't know how I would have turned out if I hadn't done theoretical math, but I would like to believe that it had some practical benefit in my like current existence, where I'm like basically doing software engineering and like not doing any pen and paper math.
So I recognize I did operations research, so definitely different field of math. But the thing with operations research is you got to prove that your mathematical allocation is optimal. If it's not optimal, you can't prove it. It's wrong. Basically, it's like a thing that the professor really hard drilled into me. And something about that is a critical attitude. Like I'm not going to believe anything anyone says. I want to see the full proof. And maybe it's not so much the theory, but more the attitude that comes with the science. I like to think that also makes you good at debugging. I'm hypothesizing a bit, but I can definitely imagine, Wes, that's a thing that's still stuck with you.
This kind of reminds me of the paper, or at least the title of the paper. It's called "Better to be Frustrated Than to Be Bored," like about affective states students might have, and like which ones are better for learning. And I do think like what you described is, like writing it out isn't necessarily boredom, but like frustration or kind of responding to something and wanting to prove something or lock it down. That does strike me as kind of a key.
I have a kid now, so I can tell you the story. My theory right now is kids learn to speak because they're frustrated, because they have an idea in their mind they can't tell their parents. And there's this god-awful phase with a lot of screaming in the household when the kid is making it absolutely sure that something is highly amiss, but eventually the kid learns, oh, I got to learn the language, and that's how I can properly communicate to my parent. There's a little frustration thing there that I do think is key.
Hadley, bringing it back to you. Yeah, so what do you, I know you've brought up things like I've seen, I think in the Posit Slack, like I think you shared out an article that mentions like you wouldn't bring a forklift to the gym. And I'm curious your thoughts on this topic of like, yeah, people putting in effort and learning, and how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely. I think that the one thing that's really interesting is like we now, like many of us now have the opportunity to automate parts of our job that we love doing. And like you can automate that and you can find joy in different parts of your job, but you also don't necessarily like have to. Like you can keep doing those bits, like maybe not all the time, but like tactically, like you don't have to just optimize for like velocity all the time. But then the other thing I think about is like why does anyone learn to play a musical instrument? Like you can hear, you can find someone on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Music or whatever doing a way better job of playing any music than you. So there's also that like, some of these skills we gain joy from regardless of whether we're the best at the world or not. And I think like some of that, like how do we, I don't know, teach this stuff? It's about, we're like, yeah, it's coming back to like when you do math in high school, like most of that you're never going to use, but like you're training your brain in this kind of like cool problem solving way that you can get a lot of enjoyment from, like independent of the strict utility.
I mean, and again, that if I can come back to a notebook, one thing that I really like about notebooks, it is sort of a nice place where you can put your thoughts as well. There's something about a notebook that is able to do that way more than a code base, like as an artifact, so to say. It definitely does feel a little bit more like a thing you would write down in your own little diary. as opposed to like a theoretical book in the closet somewhere. Like it can still be very personal, and you can also just research something that you're interested in as opposed to something for your work. I will say with LLMs though, like this is a habit even if I generate notebooks kind of from scratch and I try to go like super big and stuff, you can still vibe code defensively, if that makes sense, in a notebook. And I have a video on this on the Marimo channel if people are interested. But one thing I really love to do now is if I make charts, the use case here is I wanted to find out if buying a bread machine was going to save the family money. It's a really silly use case, but you can imagine there's this one line sort of going up that sort of says like, how much money do I spend going to the bakery? And there's this other line going up that's a little bit more flat that says, okay, I only pay for the ingredients and I have this upfront cost of the bread maker. And those two lines intersect somewhere. Except I'm a Bayesian, so it's not a break-even point, it's a break-even distribution because both lines, they wiggle around a bit. There's a bit of uncertainty. We got to take that into account as well, right? So I was interested in the break-even point distribution. But one thing I explicitly told Claude to do, and it did it wrong a few times, and it kept hammering on it, those two charts need to have the same x-axis, and they have to be on top of each other, because otherwise I cannot glance at both distributions at the same time. And when Claude was done, I noticed that it was way off because the distribution at the bottom did not fit the chart on top. You can just sort of draw straight lines. You could see it was really wrong. But the only reason I was able to find that bug was because I was coding defensively, quote unquote. Those two charts have to be under each other. And there have to be all sorts of sliders so I can also wiggle around to check my intuition. But I am very conscious of the fact that I have to sort of code defensively in a notebook these days, especially if I go for more than 2 cells that Claude can just go ahead and rip like that. And that's also, again, still a bit of a mental exercise. You got to think about that up front. Even if you're not doing the syntax, oh, how am I going to model this? What do I care about? Figuring that out. Yeah. Don't skip that.
I think the visualization is like super interesting though, because I think that's like a completely different lens to look at your effort. And like whenever you look at things through a different lens, you're more likely to find problems. And I've been kind of sort of wondering about that, like in the era of like reviewing LLM generated code. Like, sure, you probably don't want to like read every single, line of code the LLM has written. That's not like super valuable. But it feels like tools to be like, okay, well, let's change the code set in like this way. There's now like a new big blob of code here. So you can be like, well, actually, like kind of structurally, that doesn't feel right to me. Like I expected the blob to be over here or to be spread out this way. So it feels like, I don't know, like maybe there's the scope for kind of cool new visualization tools to help us understand like what are LLMs doing to our code in the same way that, looking at pictures of data is so useful if we can figure out new abstractions for visualizing code so we can better understand like what's the big picture implication of this change.
Another sort of just a mental exercise that I do recommend people do, and this is like an old school thing people never really did. You know how you win a Kaggle competition? By checking the training data set to see if there's any mislabeled items in there. It's a little thing that tends to go wrong. There's a lot of Kaggle competitions with bad labels. And again, like, how do you find out? Well, just look at the data set for a bit. And it's one of these steps that people sometimes miss. And visualizations can make that a whole lot simpler. Maybe you do something with an embedding and then the sentiment curves and, there's all sorts of fun stuff you can do. But again, there's all these exercises that if you go just a little bit slower, you can just give yourself permission to like just do this one little check. And oh boy, does that really help you understand stuff as well. And again, human in the loop. Even if you're a business that there's this dream that you can have like the one-man billionaire startup with LLMs now and stuff, right? But something is telling me if you're the one man and the LLM does everything and you have no idea what the LLM is doing, like, really? 1 billion company? Is that really? I don't know. There's still something about like there's got to be some human around that still understands what's happening. I think that's still kind of fine. The joke I always make is natural intelligence is also still a pretty good idea.
Yeah. Wes, I feel like there was a response, kind of a reaction from you. Do you think a person will vibe code $1 billion company?
If they don't get too distracted by shiny objects along the way, that seems to be the thing that's happening. Like, I mean, I've been observing things like Gastown and like the things from the Steve Yegi verse, and honestly, my reaction, and this is a little bit of a hot take, is like, I'm like, any of these people building anything useful? I'm like, I'm show me something that I can use that's useful. Like I mean, I see that there's a lot of work being done, a lot of tokens are being burned, but I'm not seeing like the useful output. I wrote a blog post called the Mythical Agent Month that's been circulating, and that came out a couple of weeks ago. And the idea, and so the idea is that the Mythical Man Month is a book that came out in 1975, so over 50 years ago. And obviously, software engineering and computers and the internet is a lot of stuff has happened in the last 50 years. But Fred Brooks wrote a bunch of claims. Essentially, the core idea is that when you add people to a project, to a late project, it will become later, and that the larger a team is, the more communication overhead, coordination overhead you have. And so essentially now with agents doing the development, more or less you have like an agentic version of the Mythical Man Month where, essentially like you are the chief surgeon. And so you have to have this conceptual model of how the system works and what the agents are supposed to do. But you also have to review and supervise their work and make sure they're doing the right thing and they aren't creating giant messes for each other to clean up. And so for what I'm seeing is that people are creating these like 500,000 line, million line software projects, but they're just gigantic hairballs that are like, at the end of the day, like, this could have been 50,000 lines of code and a great deal simpler, more resource efficient, like, and a lot more useful and without lots of like unnecessary features, because there's nobody to say no. You can add 100 additional features like every day you wake up and over your morning coffee, you're like, oh, can you add these 5 new features that I thought of, while I was in the shower? And the agent's never going to say no. And the agents won't refactor the code and make the code cleaner unless you tell them to. And so it's essentially like now, like your judgment and your taste as a designer of these software systems has become the single most important skill in your tool belt. And unless you are extremely judicious about what you build and what you don't build and how you proactively hold the agents accountable to build in accordance with your vision and to not, if they create messes, that you spot the messes and you clean them up. But essentially, like, it's created a new type of industrial process for building software. And there's a lot of people that are just kind of YOLOing it with their agent sessions and going in and essentially they're asking 1,000 prompts in a row, like requesting one feature after another, and they're spotting bugs and asking the agents to fix them, but with little regard for the types of code bases that they're generating. And I think people who are engaging in that mode are in for a world of pain at some point in the future when they hit the inevitable scalability wall, when the performance of their agents like stops being good. And like every time they touch any file, they're like, oh my God, my context, the pain, it burns. So yeah, it's an interesting problem. I mean, maybe there'll be magical pills from Anthropic and OpenAI to like make this pain go away and to like bring agentic supervisors like auto software engineering, auto data science, so that like, you can just ask for what you want and like let the software process be conducted by, an agent swarm or whatever they're calling it these days. But yeah, it's not quite there yet.
But it's also, I mean, if I think about scikit-lego, right? There's a thing that I made, and I guess sure, let's say scikit-lego, that could have been vibe coded immediately. We didn't need Vincent to write that stuff on his laptop. We could have done it way more efficiently. Okay, great. The reason why scikit-lego is popular is because I went on stage at a couple of events and started talking about it and started spreading the message. And maybe just taking a step back, the code is not all of it. It's also like, can you do the marketing around it? Can you it's also about like, can I demonstrate to other people that I've got taste, and can I convince them that even if I'm vibe coding, you are gonna get value out of it if you use my thing, as opposed to some other dude who is also vibe coding but maybe just wants to YOLO it. Like, people sometimes forget about there's a marketing aspect of it, and that's also a constraint. How fast can you convince people that your thing is good? Maybe that's more the constraint, and also why I figured going into DevRel is actually a super useful skill. Can we code it?
Yeah, I completely agree. Like if I put out something, even if I built it with agents, or if Highly put something out built with agents, like people are probably more likely to take it seriously, because they'll say, oh well, these are people that built things that weren't slop in the past. And I've put a couple things on GitHub that I would describe as AI slop. Like it's my slop, it works, but most of the projects I'm building are deliberately like not slop, and like I don't want to be known as like a purveyor of AI slop on the internet. That's not very brand aligned.
I will say that, like, on the topic of like, okay, is there like something more awesome now with these LLMs? There's this feeling that people miss that. Like, what's the better app that we didn't have before? In my mind, and we've mentioned it before in this episode, there is this one exception that stands above everything as like the giant pillar. And that's widgets. You can't actually comfortably say, for this one analysis, I need this one widget now. You download the Marimo skills that we've got, and you can just generate the widget on the fly. There's this one math challenge on Veritasium. I'll send you a link. But the whole math problem becomes a whole lot simpler if you can just have the D3 graph chart appear. That was done in 5 minutes with Claude, and it's part of the notebook, and it becomes so much easier to understand this one math problem. I like Tectonic and Suguru. Those are like Sudoku kinds of puzzles. Oh, I have a widget now that lets me generate them on the fly and then have all sorts of... The fact that that's normal is just such a creative freedom. Right? And I will say, like, that was just not imaginable a few years ago, but that is something that is just... People are sleeping on this. For God's sakes, I still don't get why I'm the only guy so excited about these widgets, but there's so much intellectual freedom to gain here.
I love that it all comes back to widgets, like we started at widgets, and so I think honestly we've covered so much incredible stuff, and I feel like I've just got so much to think about. I think I feel existential about my role in the loop in coding, but now I also feel like we've learned so much about like notebooks and widgets. I really appreciate your approach of like wanting to look at charts and to think like deeply about the problems and actually like be sure that you're learning and like processing problems as you go. And I definitely think for listeners, like the idea of like Marimo and trying life like 3 cells at a time, even if you're working with Claude, trying this sort of like exercise of being in a notebook, like building things gradually as an exercise seems super powerful. And I don't doubt that widgets also have a huge role in that as an output that you can sort of like manipulate or interact with.
It makes my thought a bit more interactive, and there's some things where a static chart is just fine, but there are also these moments where that interaction is able to surprise me in a different way that just a static chart on its own isn't able to. I forget, there was this thing in R. Oh, this is super long ago, Hadley. Like there was ggplot, and then we had this thing that you were building on top of ggplot. Yeah, I think wasn't that like the interactive canvas thing that you were building on top of dplyr like 10 years ago ish?
Yeah, it's like ggviz. ggobi was kind of another super interactive thing and a different.
So that was actually in my mind a couple of weeks ago. We now have like that, the ability to actually select points in a matplotlib chart now.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, brushing. Yeah,
that was, and that's like another one of these examples where, oh, that just opens up so many things that you can play with now. Just having a few widgets like that.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, Vincent, thanks so much for coming on to the test set. I'm also gonna flag, you mentioned the Gorilla dataset. So for people listening, I think I found your article OpenAI versus the Gorilla dataset. So definitely recommend people check it out.
And I guess like the only thing to people listening, check out any widget and know that there are on the Marimo, there's a Marimo skills repository. You download that, and then Claude Code can generate these things on the fly for your Marimo notebook. Give that thing a spin. And have Trevor Mance on the show. He's the guy that made it. He's a colleague of mine.
I'm a big Trevor fan, so I feel like it's inevitable.
Same. I think I'm on record, like, besides Trevor, I'm the guy who made the most widgets, and I might have beaten Trevor at this point.
That's a sweet spot to hold, I feel like.
It is. And if people are interested in widgets, by the way, there's a library called Wiggly Stuff that has about 48 widgets at this point, I think, that people can directly use.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Well, thanks. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I know it's like late in the Netherlands, so appreciate you burning the midnight oil for us.
My pleasure.
And
it's fun to hang out with you folks.
Yeah, we'll see you on the internet.
Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
The Test Set is a production of Posit PBC, an open source and enterprise tooling data science software company. This episode was produced in collaboration with creative studio Agi. For For more episodes, visit thetestset.co or find us on your favorite podcast platform.